A thin fog clung to the marshlands, drifting over the jagged inlets and dark waters of the Outer Banks. The sun had barely begun its ascent, painting the horizon in muted shades of amber and gray, and yet the land seemed to hold its breath. You could almost feel it, the weight of centuries pressing down on the soil, whispering secrets long ignored. This was Roanoke Island, and here in the summer of 1587, 115 English men, women, and children.
But the science. On this channel, we decode real DNA, uncover lost ancestries, and bring ancient genomes to life through cinematic storytelling. If that excites you, subscribe for weekly insights. Like the video to support science-based history, and drop a comment. Your questions help guide what we explore next.
Had arrived under the searing Atlantic sun, carrying nothing but hope, desperation, and a fragile dream of permanence. They were not the first, and certainly not the last, to try colonizing this wild, unforgiving land. Previous expeditions had vanished or failed, victims of hunger, disease, or miscalculation. But John White, a man both pragmatic and visionary, led this group with families at his side, planting crops and raising homes in the dense forest. A child was born in this fragile settlement, Virginia Dare, the first English child born on American soil. Her birth was celebrated as a triumph, a statement that England had planted a seed in this new world. For a while, it seemed as though the colony might endure. The settlers built a modest fort of wood, erected palisades, and began tentative friendships with the indigenous tribes. Smoke rose from their hearths in thin spirals, echoing across the waterways, a signal of life amidst the towering pines. And then, as if the world itself had pulled a veil over their existence, everything changed. John White sailed back to England to gather supplies, expecting a brief absence. Months stretched into years. Europe had erupted into conflict. The Spanish Armada threatened, ships requisitioned, resources diverted. When White finally returned in August 1950, the island greeted him with silence. Palisades stood upright, gates unbroken, buildings intact. And yet the air was empty. No laughter, no footsteps, no smoke curling from hearths. Carved into a post was a single word, Croatoan. Nearby, on another tree, only the letters Crow remained. A code, perhaps? A clue? A promise? Or a cruel riddle? White was left to speculate, heart pounding, hope and dread coiling in equal measure. He could not pursue answers. Storms battered his ship, supplies dwindled. And so he returned to England, never to see Roanoke again. For centuries, the disappearance of this colony haunted historians, inspired conspiracy theorists, and lingered in the imagination of a nation. Tales of survival, integration, massacre, or exile grew in equal measure. Rumors spread of tribes with pale-skinned descendants, of crude maps showing English-style villages hidden in dense forests. Scholars scoured archives, combed the islands, but every lead ended in ash, every clue evaporated like morning mist over the estuary. Excavations unearthed fragments of pottery, rusted tools and beads, but nothing that confirmed the fate of these people. The line between myth and history was razor-thin, blurred further by the infamous Dare stones, rocks inscribed with messages allegedly from Virginia Dare's mother. Some were dismissed as forgeries, yet the allure persisted. Each discovery, each rumor, became another layer of the legend, a puzzle box locked tight against time. The 20th century brought technology, and with it, new possibilities. Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR, and aerial surveys promised to uncover secrets hidden beneath centuries of soil and vegetation. Scholars revisited old maps, including the watercolored charts of John White. Some faint markings suggested locations far inland, 50 miles west of the coast, where a fort might have been hidden from sight, or perhaps from those who sought to erase it. But it was not until 2025 that the whispers of history became impossible to ignore. The First Colony Foundation, a coalition of archaeologists, historians, and geneticists, turned their attention to a patch of dry earth along the Chowan River. The land was unassuming, ordinary even, yet beneath it lay a story written in the fragments of human life long buried, but unmistakably from the late 1500s. This was not a scattering of trade items or accidental arrivals. Someone had lived here, sustained themselves, adapted, endured. For centuries, their story had been erased by neglect and time, and now, through science, it began to whisper again. LiDAR scans revealed post holes, fence lines, and hearths, patterns invisible to the untrained eye. Subtle traces suggested structures, settlements, life itself, previously hidden by forests and the passage of centuries. And then came DNA evidence. Buried in the genetic code of indigenous descendants were markers of Western European ancestry dating back precisely to the time of the colony's disappearance. This was not the result of later colonists mixing with local populations. This was evidence of the lost colonists themselves, living, integrating, surviving in a world that had long been thought to have swallowed them whole. The implications were staggering. For 4 centuries, the narrative had been of total vanishing, of mass disappearance, of bodies lost, of lives erased. Now the story began to shift. The settlers hadn't disappeared, they had dispersed. Some had integrated with the Croatan tribe on Hatteras Island, leaving behind traces of culture, tools, and remarkably, DNA. Others had moved inland, building isolated settlements, blending into the forests, leaving only fragments of evidence for modern archaeologists to piece together. It was a revelation that transformed the legend into a lesson, a parable of survival, adaptation, and quiet endurance. Roanoke was not a failure. It was a story of resilience, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of isolation, scarcity, and fear. And yet it was terrifying in its implications. History had been wrong for centuries, and the truth had been quietly living, hidden in plain sight. As the morning fog lifted over the Outer Banks, one could almost hear the whispers of the past carried on the wind, voices of children, of women, of men who had stepped into a new world with hope in their hearts and survived quietly against all odds. Their traces were etched into the land, the soil, the rivers, and the very DNA of those who had remained behind. The mystery of the lost colony was not gone. It had simply evolved, like the people it had once sought to conceal. The forest stretched endlessly, a living, breathing labyrinth of pine and oak, interwoven with creeks and marshes, concealing centuries of untold stories. To the untrained eye, it was simply wilderness. To the archaeologists and historians of 2025, it was a vault, safeguarding the echoes of human endeavor long thought erased. Beyond the coastal plains, 50 miles inland, the first hints of Site X emerged, an anomaly beneath layers of sediment and fallen leaves, faint traces suggesting walls, post holes, and faint embers of long-dead hearths. Here, the soil held secrets of colonists who had chosen a different path, one of solitude and self-preservation. The First Colony Foundation team worked with methodical precision, brushing centuries of detritus from artifacts, scanning the earth with LiDAR, and analyzing chemical signatures in pottery shards. Each fragment told a story. Glazes, compositions, shapes, subtle differences in design revealed cultural persistence and adaptation. This was a group that had not merely survived, they had sought to maintain a piece of England in the wilderness, preserving traditions even as they embraced new realities. Ground-penetrating radar detected an irregular pattern. clusters of post holes, and what appeared to be the faint outline of long-forgotten gardens. The soil chemistry indicated human habitation, burned residue from cooking fires, traces of cultivated grains, and even pollen evidence suggesting attempts at farming in the inland soil. Archaeologists hypothesized that the settlers had moved deliberately, navigating by rivers and landmarks, distancing themselves from potential threats, whether Spanish patrols, hostile tribes, or the unforgiving Atlantic storms. Meanwhile, on Hatteras Island, another story was unfolding. A story quieter, more subtle, but no less significant. Oral traditions of the Croatan people, long dismissed as myth, had persisted through generations. Tales of pale settlers, of families blending into tribal life, raising children, sharing knowledge, and forming bonds. When archaeologists unearthed iron tools, fragments of pottery, and even a slate writing tablet bearing faint English script, the folklore suddenly gained tangible form. Here, the settlers had not just survived, they had integrated, adapting to the rhythms of the land and the community, exchanging knowledge, language, and culture. The significance of this dual narrative, a split colony, was staggering. Some had chosen isolation, carving out inland refuges, perhaps never interacting again with European or indigenous settlements. Others had embraced integration, forming relationships that bridged continents and cultures. The lost colony was not a single tragedy, but a tapestry of survival strategies, a mosaic of human resilience. DNA analysis further confirmed the dual paths. Genetic markers in local populations revealed European ancestry dating precisely to the late 16th century. In some cases, these markers suggested a blending with indigenous lineages, consistent with the Croatan integration theory. In other cases, markers aligned with isolated inland populations, descendants of those who had sought solitude. The implications challenged centuries of historical narrative. The colonists had not vanished, they had endured, quietly, invisibly, in plain sight. Artifacts from Site X and Hatteras Island painted a picture of adaptation. Utilitarian pottery hinted at self-sufficiency. Cooking implements suggested dietary adjustments, incorporating local flora and fauna. Iron tools, clearly European in origin, had been repurposed and repaired. This was not mere survival. It was deliberate, intelligent adaptation to a new world with different rules, resources, and dangers. Historical accounts from Jamestown and other early English settlements, once thought separate, were re-examined. Eyewitness reports of tribes with lighter skin and European features, once dismissed as exaggeration or coincidence, gained newfound credibility. Maps of the era, long studied and assumed complete, revealed subtle hints of inland forts and settlements previously overlooked. Each piece of evidence built upon the last, creating a web of possibility that stretched from the Outer Banks deep into the Carolinian interior. Scholars began to recognize that the mystery of Roanoke was not a story of annihilation, but of fragmentation. Fear, scarcity, and the struggle for survival had divided the colony. Some chose the protection of community among the Croatan, blending and adapting. Others, driven by independence or necessity, sought refuge in the inland forests, leaving traces subtle but undeniable. Survival demanded sacrifice, ingenuity, and above all, a willingness to disappear from the world that had once sought to claim them. It was here, amid the quiet of the forests and the whispers of oral history, that the story of resilience became clear. Roanoke was no longer simply lost. It had evolved, transformed into something neither English nor fully indigenous, but a hybrid of cultures, a testament to the human capacity for endurance under unimaginable pressure. For the researchers, every artifact, Every fragment of pottery, every faint trace in the soil was a window into the past. It revealed decisions made in desperation, courage under duress, and the quiet heroism of people navigating a world hostile, unfamiliar, and unknowable. Here, the colony's narrative was rewritten, not in words of official record, but in the silence of soil, the faint scratches on slate, and the genetic code carried through generations. The landscape itself became a witness. River bends, hidden inlets, and dense thickets were not obstacles, but protective corridors, guiding survival. The inland settlers had learned the language of the land, how to find water, how to cultivate unfamiliar crops, how to coexist with the rhythms of nature and the presence of neighboring tribes. Theirs was a story of adaptation on the edge of civilization, where failure meant death and ingenuity meant life. By the time modern technology arrived, LiDAR, DNA sequencing, radiocarbon dating, soil chemistry analysis, the puzzle pieces finally began to fit. The vanishing of Roanoke was no longer a monolithic tragedy. It was a narrative of fragmentation, adaptation, and quiet survival. Two fates, intertwined yet distinct, one among the Croatan, one in the inland forests, both testifying to human tenacity in the face of impossible odds. And so, as the sun dipped low over the rivers and the forests, casting long shadows across the land, one could imagine the colonists of 1587 walking those paths, invisible yet indelible. They had not vanished, they had lived, adapted, and in ways only now fully understood, survived. The morning mist clung to the banks of the Chowan River, curling like smoke over the still water. Archaeologists in 2025 moved carefully, aware that centuries of soil, leaf litter, and sediment were guarding the secrets of lives long past. Every travel stroke, every brush across pottery shards was deliberate, reverent, a dialogue with the past. The air seemed charged, as though the land itself knew it was about to give up its story.
At Site X, the evidence grew undeniable. Beneath layers of silt and decay, foundations of small structures emerged, faint outlines suggesting huts, storage areas, and communal spaces. Charred remnants hinted at fires used not for destruction, but warmth, cooking, and survival. Each artifact was cataloged with meticulous care. Fragments of bowls and jars, pieces of iron tools, arrowheads showing adaptation of European weaponry to local conditions. Nothing was flashy, nothing screamed conquest. It was the quiet work of survival, intelligence, and adaptation. Yet it was the technology of the 21st century that finally allowed the full story to emerge. Ground-penetrating radar revealed subterranean anomalies, rectangular impressions consistent with buildings, post holes aligned in grids. LiDAR stripped away the forest canopy digitally, revealing linear clearings, faint paths that had once guided human feet through dense underbrush. It became evident these colonists had not wandered aimlessly. They had planned, built, and navigated with precision, using the land itself as both map and shield. Then came the moment that shifted everything. A burial site, subtle and unassuming, revealed a skeleton lying supine, head to the west, feet to the east, following Christian tradition. The simplicity of the grave belied its significance. Here was a European female, dating to the late 16th century. She was not an explorer's accidental companion, nor a later settler. She was part of the original Roanoke group. Her presence confirmed that the colony had endured, silently, through generations, leaving traces only now visible to those willing to look. The DNA results were staggering.
Mitochondrial analysis confirmed her European ancestry, consistent with the English colonists of 1587. More importantly, markers in surrounding indigenous populations hinted at intermarriage and assimilation, validating centuries of oral history long dismissed as folklore. Genetic sequences told a story older than any document, a story of blending, adaptation, and survival. This was no myth. This was fact, written in the very code of life. Researchers began cross-referencing soil samples, pottery, and skeletal remains. The inland Site X colonists left a trail. Their tools, pottery, and bones spoke of cautious adaptation, careful planning, and coexistence with the natural world. The Croatan settlers on Hatteras Island left a different but equally compelling trace. Artifacts integrated into indigenous material culture, tools and pottery reworked, evidence of cohabitation, trade, and shared survival strategies. Two paths diverged from a single origin, one inland, one along the coast, but both told the same fundamental truth. The colony had not vanished. Radiocarbon dating placed the inland remains precisely within the years after 1587. Pottery glazes, composition, and construction methods matched those used in late 16th century England, confirming the timeline. The artifacts were utilitarian, not ceremonial, evidence of daily life, work, and persistence. Chemical residue in storage jars suggested grains, nuts, and local vegetables, indicating the colonists had learned to cultivate native crops and supplement English staples. They had survived by combining knowledge from home with the wisdom of the land. Meanwhile, the Croatan integration theory gained weight. Oral histories had persisted for centuries, describing the arrival of pale settlers, their children, and the cultural blending that followed. When researchers compared genetic data from the Hatteras population with the European markers found inland, the picture became clear. One branch of colonists integrated peacefully, while another forged independent communities further inland. Folklore, once discounted as exaggeration or romanticism, preserved fragments of history too fragile for written records alone. Each new discovery added texture to the narrative. Tools showed wear patterns, repairs, and adaptations. Pottery fragments indicated cooking practices adjusted to local ingredients. Slate writing tablets preserved the faintest traces of English script, suggesting literacy, record-keeping, and cultural continuity. Even subtle alignments of post holes hinted at social organization, family units, communal spaces, and areas designated for storage, food preparation, or defense. The settlers had not merely survived, they had built functional, enduring communities under extreme conditions. The implications were profound. Historical textbooks, long portraying Roanoke as a tragic disappearance, required revision. The colony had not failed, it had evolved. It had adapted to environmental pressures, political threats, and social challenges. Colonists had made strategic choices, integration where possible, isolation when necessary. Their story was not one of collapse, but of resilience, creativity, and the human instinct to endure. Researchers also began examining the broader context. The Spanish patrols that had menaced the eastern seaboard, the shifting alliances among native tribes, the droughts and harsh winters of the late 16th century had all played a role in shaping these choices. Survival was a multi-layered strategy. Geography, diplomacy, resource management, and adaptation all intertwined. Roanoke was not lost. It had survived as a network of communities, hidden from history, only recorded in traces. The science converged with history, archaeology, and folklore. LiDAR revealed the inland trails, confirming the paths settlers might have taken. Ground-penetrating radar identified subterranean structures. DNA revealed ancestry and intermarriage. Chemical analysis illuminated diet and adaptation. Together, these techniques formed a comprehensive reconstruction of the colony's fate, a story of fragmentation, survival, and eventual assimilation. By the time the findings were published in 2025, the historical narrative of Roanoke had shifted dramatically. Scholars now acknowledge the dual fate of the settlers, some merging with native communities, some establishing inland settlements, both enduring far longer than previously thought. The colony was no longer a mystery, it was a testament to human endurance, intelligence, and adaptation. As the sun set over the forests, rivers, and coasts where the colonists had walked, one could almost hear their footsteps echoing through time. Roanoke had not disappeared, it had persisted, quietly, invisibly, until modern science gave it voice. The lost colony was found, not in a single moment of revelation, but in the meticulous, patient work of centuries of inquiry, technological advancement, and the careful interpretation of whispers from the past. And so, the narrative of Roanoke was transformed. From tragedy to triumph, from myth to verified history, the settlers' legacy endured. They had vanished from the annals of conventional history, but they had not vanished from the land, from the people, or from memory. Science, patience, and determination had finally listened to what the forest, the soil, and the people had been saying all along. They were here, they had survived, and their story, once lost, had been found. The river's surface shimmered under the late afternoon sun, reflecting golden light, as though the land itself sought to honor the centuries-old secret it had harbored. Archaeologists packed their tools carefully, aware that what had been uncovered was more than artifacts or bones. It was the voice of a people long thought to have vanished. Every carefully cataloged shard, every soil sample, every DNA sequence was a note in a symphony of survival that had played quietly for centuries. Historians who once debated endlessly about the colony's fate now faced a transformation of their field. Textbooks were revised. Academic conferences buzzed with new energy as researchers debated interpretations of the inland settlements and the Croatan integrations. The narrative had shifted from disappearance to resilience, from tragedy to quiet triumph. Roanoke was no longer a cautionary tale about vanished explorers, it was a story of strategic adaptation, cultural exchange, and the human will to endure. In the quiet towns of North Carolina, descendants of native families now carried traces of European ancestry embedded for centuries, hints of the settlers who had integrated, married, and lived among them. Oral traditions, once dismissed as mere folklore, were now validated by science, a reminder that memory can survive in stories even when written records fail. Elders recounted tales passed